This is City Focus, the podcast from the League of Oregon Cities, where we explore the issues that matter to cities across Oregon.
Welcome to City Focus. We've been on hiatus for a while and are delighted to be back in production beginning with this episode. Bridging the Urban-Rural Divide was presented at our annual conference as a panel session, and we wanted to share it as a podcast too. So join me for a discussion with two city leaders on reducing the divide between urban and rural communities and learning to work together for common goals. Welcome, everybody, to today's session on Bridging the Urban-Rural Divide. We are joined today by two panelists. Our guests include Portland City Commissioner Amanda Fritz and Hermiston Mayor Dave Drotzman. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So this was going to be a podcast back before everything started, and it's kind of morphed into a panel session for a conference. And I want to read something because I think this sort of typifies and exemplifies the relationship that you two have when it was suggested that we do this together. It's been said that you two exemplify what it means to keep an open mind, find common ground, and develop reasonable solutions to complicated problems that address everyone's concerns while still respecting everyone's unique values. I think that quality in people sometimes is hard to find, and so when you do find it, people notice it. So I want to set the tone that way, and then give you two a chance to quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of get into digging into the urban-rural divide in Oregon. Mayor Drotzman?
Thank you. Whoever said that was very kind and very nice. I do have a shared mutual respect for Commissioner Fritz, and we have worked really well together on the League of Oregon Cities board. I am now off the board. I'm currently serving my 8th year as mayor of the city of Hermiston. I'm up for re-election this fall for another 4 year. I'm running unopposed, so hopefully I win. It's been my pleasure to serve on the League of Oregon Cities board for the last 3 years prior to this, and so I got the opportunity to sit on the board with Commissioner Fritz, and we had a great time and a shared interest in moving the League of Oregon Cities forward, and so I enjoyed my time on the board and our collaboration and working together.
I think when I read that description of the two of us, I pretty much thought, isn't that what city council members do? I think that certainly in my area that I serve as non-partisan and we're not elected by parties. And I think that the essence of being a good member of the city council is to have an open mind and listen to disparate views, because you tend to get to better outcomes if you have everybody at the table, and if you consider the people who are on the far ends of the side, you consider what they have to say, because sometimes you do need to go to one side or the other, and sometimes finding a compromise is a lot better. So I don't see that as anything different from what the mayor and I do on our councils. We serve with people who are intelligent driven, they've been elected in their own rights, and they have their own opinions. So in order to be effective on our city councils, we have to be respectful of those opinions. I've been on the Portland City Council, this is my 12th year. I'll be retired in about 100 days. Who's counting? And who's counting anything these days? It's just right. So difficult. Right. If Monday seems like an eternity away. We just got done with the wildfires across the state in Oregon, and Mayor Drotzman and I had a telephone call that, the smoke from the Willamette Valley, from all over was blowing to Eastern Oregon. So that also shows that we are all in this together. What happens in Portland affects what happens in the rest of the state. And part of my goal as serving on the League of Oregon Cities board was to get to know other members from different parts of the state. I'll have to just apologize. I have a cat as a co-worker. And occasionally he gets a bit enthusiastic and tries to, I'm kind of in his space. So should I react in a way that doesn't seem seemly for a council member, it's because my cat has tried to attack me. Okay. We don't have doors in my house, so I can't shut in places. Anyway, I wanted to get to know people from parts of the state and to let them know that Portland really does try to listen to other parts of the state. We're just like on a council, you're not always going to agree, but you can't be effective as a state, and in particular the state legislature, that we haven't in the years that I've been on the council, really been able to talk about our differences in a way that brings people together. And that's what Dave and I try to do.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the wildfires too, where it affecting everybody geographically. Obviously, Oregon is a very vast and large state. Let's talk a little bit about that urban-rural divide that people talk about. You know, it's sort of the I-5 corridor, and then it's the rest of the state. I mean, in both of your time on the board and interacting and getting to know people, how have you seen that sort of manifest, you know, good, bad, or indifferent? How have you seen that manifest?
Well, I think, you know, I'll come back to a point that Amanda made earlier. I don't know the position or the party affiliation of any of my counselors, nor do I on the League of Oregon Cities board. We're just people all trying to do something better for our communities and for our state. And I think just listening to each other, we obviously know where we're from. I think for a period of time, Portland wasn't on the League of Oregon Cities, or the participation was down. And so I appreciated Amanda coming back on board and representing the city of Portland, because they are such a huge, important part to our state and to all cities. And so she's been a great advocate for the city of Portland as well as the rest of the state. And so, you know, I think for us, it doesn't matter where we come from or what party affiliation we may align with. We work to do what's best interest for all of us. And so when the wildfires came up, you know, my hearts go out to those communities that were, you know, seriously affected. The cities of Phoenix, Talent, just kind of devastated. And, you know, we all did our part. We sent, you know, firefighters from our area, support staff, National Guard staff, financial resources. And that's just what Oregon does. And so there was no urban-rural divide in this case. We were all impacted by the wildfires. And we just have to do whatever we need to do to take care of our fellow communities and the families and businesses that are represented and impacted in those communities. And I would expect nothing different if that wildfire was in my backyard. And so I don't see that issue as being a separation or a divide as far as Oregon goes, as far as wildfires are related.
I think the other thing that Dave and I have in common is we're Duck fans. The first time I sit next to him, he was wearing an Oregon Ducks hat. And I was like, this is somebody I'd like to get to know. And I didn't know where he was from. We just talked about the Ducks. And so, and we have discovered that there is actually a Ducks Beavers divide on the League of Cities board, which that shameful secret, I shouldn't even be telling it. We try to overlook those things, don't we, Dave?
Yep.
But I think the more serious epiphany I had was when the legislature was passing Senate Bill 2001 and Senate Bill 534, which radically changed the way land use planning is done, in fact, really alter it. And everybody was, when I went to the meetings, it started out like, why is Portland doing this to us? And I said, this is not the position of the city council. It's opposite. For Senate Bill 534, it was absolutely opposite. So I think we've all shared some frustration at the state legislature, not necessarily listening to us. And let's get real, there actually are some philosophical and ideological differences, or just different ways that we talk about things. The first time that I started talking about equity at the League of Oregon Cities board, there was kind of a stunned silence and in fact hostility in some areas, until we figured out how do we talk about that issue, which we do share across our communities. Dave's certainly been doing a lot of great work in Hermiston. How do we talk about issues that affect so many Oregonians, in fact all of us, in a way that encourages people to listen and to want to make the changes that have been so long in coming?
Can you speak specifically to that, like maybe that issue, which resonates maybe differently on the eastern side of the state or the southern side of the state, kind of how you broach that and how you progress with that?
Well, it is about race, obviously. It's also about ability disability. For the League of Oregon Cities, it's about big cities, small cities. It's about the Willamette Valley, the rest of the state. And that's kind of how we with Dave's support and with the support of many of the people on the board, helped kind of guide the discussion to show there actually is something in this topic for everybody. It does affect all of us. And, you know, injustice to one is an injustice to all, and that people could relate to my small city's not getting its fair share of the conversation, that then perhaps they could then also talk about, there are people in my small city, there are people in my large city that don't get a fair share of the conversation or of the benefits of living in our cities.
So Mayor Drotzman, you want to speak to that a little bit too?
Yeah, I think a lot of these issues and challenges sometimes are controversial, sometimes they're easy, but not being afraid to confront those and discuss them in an open, collaborative manner. But I think the important part is just listening and allowing people to be heard. You know, there's a lot of things out there that I don't know, and a lot of things out there that I may be able to share and help people with. And so, you know, it's important that we all take the time to listen to each other. And I think that's what breaks down, you know, when you bring out an equity and inclusion comment, you know, people really, you know, sit on one side or the other a lot of times, and that divide is very separated. But when you make it more real and more relatable to their specific communities, I think people can understand it and appreciate it more. And I think that's what's coming out of our conversation is, are there barriers to participation? Are there ways that we can break down those barriers and allow more people? What are they? And so those are the kind of conversations that we have, regardless of whether it's Portland or Hermiston that's talking. You know, how do we allow more people to participate in government and the decisions that we're making for the communities that we represent? And so that's the kind of conversation, the high level conversations that we have at the board level. But we're also, you know, we challenge each other, we push back on ideas, and aren't afraid to confront controversial situations and hit them head on, and let's get it out on the table and not, you know, make it a you against me position, but here's what my feelings are, and here's what my thoughts are, and here's how it has impacted me and others. And if we're not afraid to have that deliberate conversation and listen to others when they're having that conversation, you know, meeting in the middle is a lot easier.
I think in having the voices at the table, it's not enough necessarily to put out a welcome mat, but to actually go out and encourage diverse, ideologically diverse, geographically diverse. Are you finding, you know, seems to be somewhat of a shift in people's willingness to engage? Are you finding that in your communities when there are tough topics maybe that play differently in Hermiston than they do in Portland? Is it harder to get people to engage, to have those frank conversations?
I think it's harder because of COVID and because of remote meetings. Yeah. And they said that might encourage more people to participate, but there's definitely a digital divide. You know, just even in some of the Eastern Oregon towns, the actual wireless service may not be there, just as it isn't in some parts of Portland. People don't have very good internet service. So, and then there's, you know, it's nice meeting on Zoom. It's better certainly than not meeting at all. It's not the same. Yeah. I mean, Dave and I, as I mentioned, I started sitting next to him because I think he's funny and makes me laugh. But you can't make the snide comments. I mean, people use the chat in Zoom, and that drives me absolutely nuts as an old person, because I can't follow the conversation as well as what people are writing in the chat, which again is kind of a digital divide for those of us who are working off an iPad and also not the sharpest when it comes to technology. Yeah, so that's challenging. But, you know, the bottom line is we have very similar problems or challenges in Portland as they do in Hermiston. We just have, they're larger, the numbers are bigger. You know, Dave's dealing with houseless people living outside, and how can you react humanely to people in your own community who become houseless, and also people who come in from elsewhere thinking that maybe things might be better because of the indomitability of the human spirit, always thinking that there's got to be somewhere where taking care of this. You know, the League of Oregon Cities conference last year focused a lot on homelessness. And, you know, we all discovered it's the same, it's just different orders of magnitude and different sizes of city. You know, Dave's dealing with park improvements and with naming schools and all those kinds of things that, you know, that's what we do too. So it's, and I think in some ways it's just as challenging to reach. How many people are there in Hermiston, Dave?
19,000.
I think it's just as challenging to make sure that you reach 19,000 people as it is to make sure you reach 650,000 people in Portland. That there's always going to be a segment of the community who feels left out. There's always going to be something that government could do better to provide translation, to provide accessibility, to, you know, you name it. Is it childcare? Is it whatever it might be? There's ways that people can be encouraged to participate. You know, we have that many more people. We have that many more staff as well. That's been one of the, I think that the benefits of my participation at the League of Oregon Cities is because we do have a fairly extensive government relations staff, as well as staff for a lot of our things that the League of Cities does for other communities like HR and insurance and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I think we can offer to be of assistance. You know, we had our city attorneys working with the League's attorneys on the wireless challenge that's going hopefully to the Supreme Court. You know, we can help, but, you know, it's been really kind of fun for me because all I have to do is show up and talk occasionally, but not too much. And people are just thrilled. So that's a pretty easy gig, actually. Don't be insulting, don't talk all the time, and ask people what their opinion is and really want to know what it is. That's my formula for success, which seems to have gone down all right.
We've appreciated Portland's resources. They bring some not only diverse opinions and value in people, but resources, financial resources, and administrative supports that, you know, League of Cities you know, sometimes struggles with. They have a small staff, and, you know, Portland has worked hard to partner with the League of Oregon Cities to share their opinions and be on the same page with. And so our relationship has significantly improved since Amanda's been on the board and worked with the League of Oregon Cities.
I think I've realized too that it's hard enough for the cities to get things done at the state and national level anyway. Even when we work together, it's hard to get our voices heard, and the staff has done a magnificent job of that. But if we appear to be divided, or if part of the state just seems to be absent, it's then easy for people to say, oh, see, they're not talking for everybody. You know, that's not what people in fill in the blank think. Therefore, we're going to do what we wanted to do in the first place. Whereas if we're all there saying, no, actually, we all agree that, you know, funding for mental health care, for example, top priority for the League of Oregon Cities for several sessions, and yet nothing has really changed all that much at the legislature. And that's one of the root causes of our challenges with people living outside and experiencing mental illnesses and addiction, is that we just don't have the services, and that's the same all over the state.
So, you know, if you take it into sort of a microcosm between your relationship, it seems to be a model for doing it on a larger scale. Do you see, you know, the challenges because that seems like such a light word for what we've been through this year, but, you know, you had the pandemic and then the wildfires and civil unrest, and there's all these things that affect different parts of the state. You know, using your model, do you feel like we are getting closer together to finding that? Commissioner Fritz, you said too, sort of having a united front when dealing with things at the state and the national level. Is it your sense that these are bringing us closer together as a state to be that unified front as cities, or is it further dividing us?
I think it's incumbent on city council members to make sure that it does bring us together. You know, like Dave was pointing out about the wildfires, and we have, you know, we've had mutual aid agreements where people have helped Portland and Portland has helped elsewhere. We need to let people know about that so that they understand that actually governments work pretty well within themselves, and they work pretty well with each other a lot of the time. So just making sure that people understand how that is happening. So that shared tragedy of the wildfires and just seeing the devastation in real time on television, or hearing it from our neighbors, or seeing it ourselves out of our windows. In the metro, in the Portland area, particularly, the smoke was really bringing it home. You know, if it's bad here, how much it's in a town that's actually burning, and the experiences that folks have. It was, you know, as you say, challenges not even close to describing. There's, you know, there's other examples though, where you mentioned civil unrest, that Washington County, which, you know, it's well kept secret, maybe the rest of the metro area isn't all that fond of Portland at times, that we have been seen as the 800-pound gorilla within the metro, the three counties of metro, as well as throughout the rest of the state. And the leaders in Washington County wrote a really great letter about these, the need for changes in our community in terms of community safety, and also the need to stop the violence and to assist small business owners or large business owners who've been impacted by people who aren't affiliated with the Black Lives Matter movement, needlessly smashing windows, for example, which happened as soon as the smoke lifted in Portland. They were out and they smashed windows. And I get that we're tired, we're frustrated, but to intentionally inflict harm on other human beings like that is really sad. And indeed, the metro area folks have been helpful to us, as have folks in the rest of the state.
So Mayor Drossman, you know, just what Commissioner Fritz described, how does that play out, and how does citizens of Hermiston see that, and people in other parts of the state?
Yeah, I think the civil unrest that's going on in Portland would probably be a unique example of where we may have some disparate separation between positions. I don't tell Amanda how to run her city. She doesn't tell me how to run my city. You know, so we stay out of that sort of conversation. I think that makes us work better together. But it is frustrating to see those sort of things happening to our mother city, and to see those sort of challenges that they're dealing with. But I'm not living there. I'm not living those issues every day. And so it's really hard for an outsider like myself to say, well, you should be doing this differently, or you should be doing that differently.
If you have hear them. If anybody has any ideas.
Right, yeah. If you have a solution, let them know. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear.
Absolutely all ears, if you want to tell me what to do. But, you know, that's the challenge. And really, again, it's a matter of scale. The vast majority of Portland is peaceful. If I wasn't watching the news and Twitter, I wouldn't know what was happening in a small area with 100 or 200 people out of 650,000.
And I think that brings home the message that I was going to relay, is that, you know, when we sit at a League of Oregon Cities meeting, we all have very similar issues, are on the same page, or fighting the same battle in our legislation and communicating those issues at the state level. I think the divide is probably oversold. You know, you see it a little bit more in the legislation in the Capitol House with, you know, when you put a label to something, you say somebody's an R and somebody's a D, and they have separate camps. And I think that divide is a little bit more fragmented, not as bad as at the national level, but, you know, at our state level, we see that. And so when you talk about urban-rural divide, I think that's probably where you see it more than you do down to the city level, because we don't have labels. We're all nonpartisan. We're just there to do goodwill and good work for our communities. And so, like I said earlier, I don't know any political positions of any of my counselors. And so, you know, you bring your opinion, I'll bring my opinion. Let's see if they work well together, and if we can find some common ground and fix some things. That's the whole goal. And I think, you know, it's over advertised in media. It's over advertised, you know, at the state level and the national level. And we do great things in cities, and we work well together. I
would agree with that. And I think, you know, again, when you get one-on-one with somebody, you realize 9 times out of 10, you have a lot more things in common than you do apart, and you have very similar issues in the cities as well.
Yeah, and there People are always wanting to stir up controversy to focus on the bad stuff that happens.
Mm-hmm.
When we have an evening where the demonstrations are peaceful and people get their message out, it barely gets a mention, if anything. It's hard to find out what happened. It's only when a window is smashed or something that then it's all over the headlines, and it gives the impression that there's so much more turmoil than there is, and it takes away from the focus of the work that has to happen. And it's the same with the so-called urban-rural divide. If we pretend that's something that is a significant barrier, that nothing else can happen until we address the urban-rural divide, and don't just look at, well, what are the issues? How can we work together on them? Where do we have differences and why? And is there some way to come to some agreement, or is there not? And sometimes there isn't. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. Not every vote on our city council is 5-0 either. And yet, you may lose a vote that you care about passionately, and then the very next minute you've got another item on the agenda that you maybe want people to support what you are, and you get a 5-0. So you just can't. I think in politics it really doesn't help to focus on the negative. It doesn't help our community. I think our communities, for all that some people really want to continue stirring things up, I think really what people are wanting is for elected officials to be seen to be working together, to be seen to be listening to each other, and to be seen to be on the same page as far as what are the challenges, even if we're not on the how do we solve them.
Mayor Drossman, do you want to add anything to that, just that sentiment? Because again, it's sort of the urban-rural divide is sort of a thing. And it sounds like, in talking to both of you, that maybe it isn't so much of a thing, that if you really distill it and boil it down to the people, it kind of doesn't, it's not as big of a thing.
Well, I won't say that there isn't an urban-rural divide, because obviously there is. When you have legislation at the State House that one party is pushing hard and the other party walks out on, there's a significant divide there. And unfortunately, the work of the people isn't getting done as a result. And so there is some belief that some of our smaller cities, and Hermiston is 19,000 people, but we're like the 32nd largest city in the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
There's still 200 more cities that are smaller than us. And so there's a lot of other communities that maybe are feeling like they're not as well represented. And we want to make sure that they have equal opportunity to be represented as well. And I think that's where the league comes in, and it can help work really hard to listen to those cities and make sure that their issues are being relayed. I think as we move forward as a league, our association with collaborating associations like the counties and the schools is importantly critical, so that we can work on issues that are common to each of us. We are stronger in numbers. We're heard louder in numbers. Sometimes we feel like we're falling on deaf ears, and we all, at least at the cities anyway, we believe local action is the best form of action when the decisions are made locally that impact our communities and have community input. We hate to see forced action from the state that may have better implications in Amanda City than they do in my city. And so, having those conversations at the state level and being heard, I think, is important, and having good relationships with our legislators and making sure that we're communicating our concerns and issues to our legislators so that they're being heard. And I wish we could get more of a relationship like Amanda and I have at the state level, to be able to listen to each other and collaborate and find a common ground where we could meet on. We don't have to be 100% in line, but we have to be able to listen to each other and be compassionate about what her position is, and hear it and understand it, and be able to move off of my position and come to a common ground that we can all support and stand behind. And that's lost right now in legislation at the state and the federal level. And so I hope that comes back around.
I hope so too. And I think, you both make the point very strongly that at the city level, the closer to the people level seems to work a little bit better. The disconnect, maybe that urban-rural divide is more pronounced at the state level. Looking forward, putting your crystal ball up, we're not done with 2020 yet. How do you, I know, we don't know what's coming down the pike. As far as just, the topic of this, obviously, urban-rural divide, people talking to each other and listening. Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic that we're going to get better at this, that it's going to improve? Where do you, and just sort of closing out this conversation, what do you think the future looks like for the urban-rural divide in Oregon and where we're heading?
Amanda, why don't you go first?
Dave and I serve on the Equity and Inclusion Committee for the League of Oregon Cities, and one of the things that we've been focusing on this year is attracting candidates from all walks of Oregon to serve on the board. Because again, we're not the organization is stronger when we hear from the smaller cities, when we hear from people of color, when we hear from people with disabilities, people from the LGBTQ community. That's what's going to make the organization stronger. So as people are assembling for this conference, the voting will happen at the end of the conference on the nominees. And that gives me a lot of encouragement. Frankly, as somebody who's leaving elected office after 12 years, I'm encouraged by the person who's going to be filling my seat, Carmen Rubio, who's the first Latinx member of the city council ever. I'm encouraged that people, even in a year like this, are running for election or for re-election, say, yes, sign me up for that. I can do that. And I'm glad, because at this point, I am almost done with doing that. I will then be volunteering and, giving my time to the places that I most want to. Whereas I think that's another characteristic of good elected officials. You do what's most needed, and you do what the community is wanting, whether it happens to be your top priority or not. So I'm quite looking forward to supporting Dave from afar as to whatever he will do. Not repeats of the watermelon spitting contest, because I think no matter how long I'm retired, I will never be able to get even close to where the folks from Hermiston who come and do it in Pioneer Square each year. Very, very impressive.
Well, you will always be welcome at our seed spitting contest each year. It was nice to have you out and participate, and I've really appreciated your leadership and involvement at the League of Cities level. I think as we move forward as an organization, as communities, and as leaders, I think the biggest key is the willingness to listen. Talk less, listen more, allow people to be heard, encourage more engagement from differing opinions and from differing races or sexual orientation or areas of the state, trying to get greater participation as the league continues to improve its technology and allows this to be easier to do. That's probably the one greatest thing that's going to come out of this COVID situation is we're much more comfortable at telecommuting and having meetings in this format, which will allow greater participation from places like Burns, and so they can also feel like they can participate and make a difference and a value and an impression at the league level. I think the greatest take-home message that I have learned is my participation at the board is that we all have very common, similar issues. It's real easy to judge Portland and what you read in the newspaper, or Salem and what you read in the newspaper. But until you sit in a shared room with those individuals and you hear their concerns and they're similar to yours, whether they have 600,000 more people than you or not, we have things in common that, legislation impacts us and it's meaningful and we are with it or against it. Most commonly, there's 95% of the stuff we agree on. It's unfortunate that the 5% is the stuff that often blows up and gets the most publicity. And so again, I think at the league level, just being willing to listen, be compassionate, and understand that we're all in this together to make our communities and our cities and our state a better place. We're all Oregonians. We might as well work to make it a better place to live.
I think that's great. And I think, on that note, we're going to end this portion of this. I want to thank you both for participating in this. But again, Mayor Drotzman, Commissioner Fritz, thank you so much for your insights on this and for an encouraging message, I think.
Well, thank you, Denise. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of City Focus. We'll be publishing fresh episodes every 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.